Hi everyone, I'm Matt Koss, host of The Wandering Screen on YouTube and awards editor at Awards Focus, and I'm thrilled to be moderating today's special panel for Awards Focus, celebrating some of the most exciting work in TV editing this season. We're spotlighting the submitted episodes that these talented editors have put forward for Emmy consideration, and trust me, each one is a masterclass in storytelling. Let's meet the panel. First, we have Amelia Allwarden, editor of Overcompensating, Episode 4, and Dune Prophecy, Episode 6, two wildly different tones. Joining her on Dune Prophecy is Anna Hauger, who also cut the Episode 6. And then next up, we have Todd Downing, who edited Episode 1 of Overcompensating, the series pilot. And finally, we're joined by Matthew Barbato, editor of Only Murders in the Building, Episode 406, and it's a standout one for its documentary structure. Today, we're going to dive into how each of these editors approached their Emmy-submitted episodes, and then expand the conversation to the craft as a whole. So let's get started. Todd, how did the distribution of episodes work?
Well, it was assigned, so we didn't really have a choice in it. Yeah, we were doing odds and evens, and I was doing odds, she was doing even. And then we got our delivery date pushed up, so we had actually had a third editor, Christian Kindred, come in and do episode 7. So it got a little, and then I took 6. So yeah, I did 1, 3, 5, and 6, and then Amelia did 2, 4, and 8.
Can you talk about when you came onto the project and the conversations that you both had with Benita Skinner and Scott King about the overall vibe of the show and how that would look in the...
I mean, I've worked with Scott a lot. I've known him for a long time, like 20 years, I think, or so. And so I know his sensibility quite well. He was the showrunner, I don't know if he was the showrunner, but he was the head writer of Mad TV for like 10 years. So he's very, very funny. And as Amelia can attest, like if there's kind of like a scene that didn't work out so well, and he knows how to just change it into something hilarious in the edit. So, with him, it was like, I know he's like, he wants the joke, he wants it funny. And I think Overcompensating shows that, but he also really, really wants to keep the heart of it all. So that was important too. And I think with Benny too, because Benny, everyone knows that Benny's, from his online videos, that he's quite a good comic. And, this was based on his life story, kind of. It's a version of it. So he, the heart was very important to him as well. But he was also a great dramatic actor too, which was kind of, which really helped with, getting the drama along with the comedy.
Yeah, it's a really great pilot because it totally draws me in with what you're saying about having the comedic elements and also having the heart elements. And one of the comedic elements that really showed me what the show was going to be was after the beer pong when Benny goes for a high five.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that moment and how it came together?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember even script phase reading that and I was like, oh my God, I know this feeling of like, how the hell are you supposed to do this hand, like, I don't know, like, where do you learn these handshake things? I don't know. It seems like it's intuitive to some people. Anyway, so it's basically a dap, I think it's called. It's like a bro handshake that they do, and it's traumatizing to Benny because he realizes he has to do it. So actually, I first cut it to a Shostakovich waltz, like this 100-year-old, 80-year-old, classical music piece, which was really I thought it was really funny. But as the season went on, it just really stuck out like a sore thumb. So we actually changed it to this like really insane like EDM dubstep thing without really changing the edit much at all, which was kind of nice because I think it had this balletic quality, and then put on this like insane dubstep on top of it. So yeah, I'm really proud of how that came out because it's completely bizarre and terrifying and funny all at the same time, I think.
Yeah, music is a very strong element in the show, and I noticed a lot of the editing was done to the beat of the songs. Were the songs always chosen before you both came in to edit, or was that something that came into the edit afterwards and then you had to go back and do it to the beat?
Some were scripted and some, were chosen along the way. Like the Britney Spears and the Lady Gaga, were very like, well, you had to know from the beginning whether you could use it because they're so expensive and kind of hard to get. So those, those were scripted. Charlie XCX was the music. I don't know, what's her official title? She's a producer and like music overseer.
Executive producer. Yeah.
Exactly. And she's not the music supervisor, but she oversaw like the music. And so we had access to a lot of her stuff, and her husband George, a fiance, who's like in the 1975, and the woman who does Japanese House, and Alex Summer. So we had this like little super group of who just make these pop songs for us. So a lot of it, I think they were getting the rhythm too, when we'd give them something to compose to. So it was just like, it was such an amazing experience with that, having access to that level of talent for music. It was really kind of nothing like I've ever had before for
Yeah,
pop, but, especially like pop is hard to just write by command, on command.
exactly.
Yeah. I don't know, Amelia, if you feel the same.
The other part of that episode that I really loved was the beginning of Carmen and Benny's relationship at
Hmm.
the end of the episode when they're sitting on the bed. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering how much coverage you had of the different angles and also close-ups of the characters and how you balanced that moment
Hmm.
of them sharing just a moment together.
That one was pretty standard coverage. It was like two shot, wider two shot, and then close ups, and then some, if a little closer sometimes. What we didn't want to do, I mean, I assume Dan, who directed it, didn't want to do anything tricky for that, because we wanted that to feel kind of real. I mean, Amelia has that at the end of two also, where they're just sitting and talking, and we really wanted to lean into like their connection and not distract with any sort of, you know, trickiness with the camera. And so so that was very much just like about performance and timing, of when, and giving some space to like let's see them, just sort of physically react to something in their eyes or their face or whatnot.
Yeah, and by the time we get to episode 4, Amelia's submitted episode, we see that there's such a divide between Benny and Carmen, and they haven't come back together yet. And Amelia, the episode is so much fun because of all the hazing sequences and Charlie XCX concert. Can you talk a bit about first the hazing sequence and the cutting between what the men were doing and what the women were doing?
Yeah, that was super fun to put together. And it turned out to be something a little bit different than was scripted. I think it was like all the men and then all the women or vice versa. And I tried many different versions with Scott King, the showrunner, when we were working on his cut. And we kind of landed on this in between of feeling the dual feeling of both of their hazing situations, using some split screens, which was kind of a motif that was partially scripted throughout the series. But then Todd and I really expanded on that when we started cutting the show together and kind of adding it a little bit more throughout to be more of the show's language. And so it was fun in that sequence when they're spanking Benny, and you can kind of like the reverse zoom that Dan Longino or Desiree Akvan, who directed the episode, she put in there, but then we could easily make that into split screens, push and pull each other through those sequences, and have some fun feeling the parallel nature of what Carmen and Benny are going through, even though they're completely at odds with each other.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and I have to
there's
say, well, like you'd never get to use pushes, and I was so excited that we could use pushes all the time.
it makes it a lot of fun, and I think of all the episodes, it has such a college vibe to it. And as an Australian, like that very much stands out. But I also wanted to ask about the dinner with the Carmen's dinner with the 4 girls, because there's 5 of them sitting at the dinner table, and was there a lot of coverage for that one? And how do you balance what Carmen is experiencing in her internal kind of monologue with what all these 4 girls are trying to do in the scene?
Yeah, there was a lot of coverage, that's for sure, in that crazy restaurant that actually exists and isn't a set. And La Ferretti Famigliatas is the restaurant, the fake restaurant name. And no, I mean, so like I feel like when I was putting that scene together, there's a lot of text, there's a lot of subtext between these girls, and there's a lot going on in the undercurrent of who wants to be something more or different than they are. And I think that's kind of one of the themes of the shows, right? Identity, trying on different identities, which some people do in college to see what fits. And both Carmen and Emily in that scene are vying for the approval of these girls who are in flesh and gold. And I tried to mine any little looks from Nell, the actress who plays Emily, is so great about giving little looks with her eyes. And, and so is Carmen. And so when, Emily starts handing out friendship bracelets to the girls, just trying to find little looks of Carmen looking pissed off and like, how can I one up this? And that's how she's going to then give away her Charlie XCX ticket to, Kaya Gerber's character, Esther. And so, trying to lean into the subtext about how all these people feel. And like the girl, Sloane, who's known as Horse Girl, who's sitting at the table, she's really into her horses. She's always bringing them up. She also is wanting to be loved by Bridget, who's kind of the leader of that group. And so she's kind of leading into, her saying, this word is crass. And she's like, yeah, it's crass, and so really trying to cut that dinner scene with all different angles, all different perspectives. There was a lot of coverage in the scene and just really trying to root it in the perspective of each of the girls in that moment who are vying for whatever next thing they're vying for. It's kind of a power struggle.
So were you both receiving dailies like sequentially with how the episodes were unfolding, or were
No.
you getting gifted?
I think Amelia
No,
was done with the finale before I was done with the pilot.
Yeah. We filmed the episodes out of order. Dan directed episodes 1, 2, 3, and 8. So we filmed all of those at once, and we filmed 4 through 7 all at once. And it was all kind of cross-bordered within those blocks, so to speak. And that was really important. Why it was really important for Todd and I to kind of constantly be talking and checking in with each other and remembering where one character's arc was leaving off in the previous episode when I'm picking it up, and kind of having those conversations and making sure we're looking at the global storytelling of these characters was extra important when we were getting footage and shooting it non-sequentially.
Yeah, it sounds hectic, and especially that it's in the middle of the season. And I know that Matthew's episode as well was also in the middle of the season, and it becomes like a bottle episode of Only Murders in the Building because it's like a documentary style. And Matthew, I wanted to come to you and just ask about your experience on Only Murders, because as I understand, you were in season 1 and then you came back for season 4. What brought you back to the show?
Well, the question is what took me away from the show, because it's such a great show to work on, and I got lucky to get a feature opportunity and some dramatic opportunities, so that's what took me away from the show. But I always wanted to come back to it, and I was really lucky that a spot opened up again in the 4th season so that I could come back to it.
And the documentary style, because it's the brother-sister documentary, there's so many different types of cameras that are used in the episode. There's the surveillance, there's the iPhone, there's a normal camera. What kind of coverage were you receiving, and how were you piecing them together? Was it adhering to what was in the script, or were you playing a bit more with it?
Well, the really fun thing about that episode is that because it was told from the point of view of these characters who may be suspects, the director and the cinematographer put together like these really inventive, great shots, but it was designed even from the script standpoint that it would come together in the edit room and it would have its own style, and we would find what the brothers sisters style was as directors. It was more so than other episodes, a lot of opportunity to play with things, and I had to kind of come up with transitions and a lot of different things. So, and the whole season is about making movies and perspective and capturing, what certain cameras capture and what's the truth and what's not the truth. And so this episode was supposed to be the sort of explosion of all that. And I think there's somewhere around a dozen different camera sources in there, from security cameras to iPhones, doggy cams, like all sorts of crazy cameras. There's even hidden cameras, and then there's like hidden cameras they didn't know were hidden, like extra hidden cameras. So, and they shot a lot of that on those formats, on DV, on Super 8. And so it was all just coming in on a day-to-day basis, and it was just a lot of fun and a big challenge to figure out how it was going to go together and do this sort of weird stylistic episode, but that also still landed as a Only Murders episode where you get comedy, you get murder mystery, and you get character development. So it was a lot to handle. It was a lot of fun.
I'm sure. But I was also interested in the ending of the episode with the confrontation and all the different camera angles, because it kept cutting between all the secret cameras. I guess my question is, when do you know not to cut? When do you say this isn't a time that I should be putting in a cut and we can play out the scene?
I kind of, the way that I edit is I go to the shot, I put in the shot that I want and I go as long as I feel like I don't want to edit. I don't want to put edits. I'd rather things play for long periods of time if they can, because to me, the performance is what's so important. And so I just go until it feels like either it's there's something boring happening or I need to change attention or I go to something else. And with that particular scene, it was supposed to be this apotheosis of all the cameras. Even Oliver gets a VHS camera out of his closet that quickly falls apart, and they wanted that to be a joke. So I needed to play a part of the scene of the camera degrading and being put down, but also get the information that was going on behind him. And so, it was a little bit of a tricky balance, but in the end, I just always go for telling the story and what's the performance that I need to get the story across. And, my hope is that at that point, we can look at that episode and say, oh, it's crazy. There's so many cameras, but hopefully you can just watch it and not be distracted by the fact that it's told from all of these different cameras. That's sort of a bonus if you're interested in figuring out what was going on there. Fine. But, any viewer should be able to watch that and just see the story unfolding and understand what's happening plot-wise.
So when you're in the editing bay, are you getting advice from the directors of the episode or from John Hoffman about the placement of the different cameras and when the characters are actually being on screen? Or is it something that you're able to do and get the approval from the producers after?
Yeah, I think for all of us, it's the same. We get a certain amount of time for an editor's cut, and that is just for us. And we do whatever we want in that time. And then you go through this process where you sit down first with the director, and they have their notes, and you discuss things and change things. And then it goes to the producers, and then the studio, and the network. And that's the notes hierarchy. But you do get, again, it was really fun because there were a lot of kind of missing pieces in this episode that had to be figured out and styles that had to be invented in order for the thing to work. And particularly with this episode, they shot it, they wanted it to feel unique, and they shot it in what seems like a lot of oneers. But in fact, every single scene that's a single take that looks like a single take is made up of many takes, and there's also other things happening underneath it audio-wise to kind of support the pace of the comedy. And there's even some scenes that are supposed to be static shots in the episode. For instance, Oliver is talking on the phone with his fiance, or his girlfriend, who he wants to be his fiance, and it's a single static shot of a hidden camera, and it looks like it's just one take, but there's actually about 6 or 8 tiny invisible edits in it to pace his performance, because Martin Short's performance was fantastic, but for the pace of the episode, we needed to tighten up some of his pauses. So I found places where he didn't move too much, and I was able to take it out. And if you go back and look at it, maybe you can see it now. I don't know, but hopefully you can.
Yeah, I can definitely see, and I really love how it's a jumping off point for the rest of the season, because there's a lot that gets resolved and there's also a lot that gets unanswered with your episode. Whereas when we come to Dune Prophecy 106, where we're answering a lot of questions and then also asking a lot more. And for Amelia and Anna, I mean, this is the finale episode of the first season of Dune, which is such a massive franchise. Was there pressure for this final episode in the edit to make sure that it's cohesive? How did you feel going in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was the finale of this launch of the Dune TV show, so there was definitely the pressure that comes along with that. But you just have to set it aside and just dig into, like Matthew said, the performance and the tremendous actors that we had. They really brought their A games, so we relied on the performance and the script and just made the best show we could,
Yeah,
not thinking about the pressure.
and when it comes to the division of labor, when you're both working on the same episode, how does that work?
I've co-edited a bunch of things and I really love co-editing. And the way that I tend to do it and the way that Amelia and I did it is from the start, kind of split it into half. So one of us would take the first half and the other one would take the back half. And then as we got through notes, director's cut, producer's cuts, we kind of it was all hands on deck, essentially. Amelia would take portions that I had initially cut, and I would take portions that Amelia had cut. Just like whoever felt they could address the note in the best way possible kind of tackled it.
Yeah. And what was the runtime of the first cut of the episode?
You remember, Amelia? It was long.
2.5, 2.5
2.5
hours.
hours.
2.5
Yeah.
hours. And it got down, I think it's around an hour 20, the final episode. What was
Sounds
that
about right.
process like, slicing and dicing and finding the story within the story?
Yeah, it's a difficult process. It's trial and error. I think we went through lots of different iterations and back and forth. And our editor's cut was 2.5, and then I think Anna Forster, the director, came in and pared it down a bit. I think we were probably a little under 2 after the director's
Yeah.
cut. And it's difficult. It's definitely the kind of kill your darlings kind of situation where you're having to wholesale lose scenes that you love for the runtime, which is difficult. But I think in the end, with Alison Schapker, our magnificent showrunner and producer Jordan Goldberg, we were able to kind of play with what storylines are the most important to get us to this culmination. And we had the luxury of some time to figure it out. So many iterations.
That's the thing. There's so many storylines and so many different characters, and even watching it, watching the balance between the main characters and some of the more supporting ones and how effortlessly it's put together is really incredible. But I also, found that there was a a distinction between reality and the scenes that were happening in someone's head. And was there a way that you were editing those two different types of scenes together to make sure that they were separate, but also to confuse the audience?
I don't know that we were trying to confuse the audience necessarily, but we definitely kept a separation. We had the present reality and we also had the past reality in addition to this kind of mind space for the climax of the episode. And we were very intentional with how we would get into each different segment, whether it be something visual or something auditory or a cue from the scene in the present that will lead us into the past. Or with the mind killer, we ended up using some kind of flashes. Like when we were on Valia, we would flash to kind of the mind killer space. And when we were on Desmond, we would flash to his kind of greatest fear, which was the thumper on Arrakis and the accident that happened there, to kind of prepare the audience for something's happening. We're going somewhere, and then having this kind of cacophony of sound, and then we'd land in the mind space, and it was kind of just the quiet, windy, snowy landscape that was so contrasted from where we had just come.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that worm scene. I'm always fascinated by VFX in the shows, but I understand that you were working closely with VFX. So how did that impact the vision of the snow in that finale and taking the agony from earlier in the episodes?
Yeah, well, the snow was such an important character in that sequence because it was telling the story of the fear. So we had to be very meticulous with how much snow, how much black snow was coming in when to indicate Valia's fear levels. So we were in a constant back and forth with VFX about that. And we would get post-viz back and meet as a group and comment on it and figure out how to best tell the story through that. But there were so many visual effects aspects in that sequence. Amelia, I think you did the first pass on it, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a playground, right? Because it was all shot on blue screen and it was non-linear in any way, so you could kind of have a lot of fun.
Yeah, we I think we're free from kind of the linear constraints of, a real world scene in the mind space, in the mind killer space. And that sequence was really fun because it was kind of an editorial playground. On and I just passed it back and forth, trying to tell stories differently. What if we put a worm here? What if we put a crack in the ice here? What if we postage stamp this shot like crazy so they're tiny little dots? And we had the luxury of working with an amazing visual effects team, Mike Enriquez, our visual effects supervisor, and Taryn Pratt, our visual effects producer, who we were in the office with them and we could have conversations about, kind of amplifying that sequence and, the snow turning blacker when she's losing more control and lightening up when she's, more in control. And So the whole thing was kind of like, if you saw the dailies on that, it was a person with a leaf blower pointing it at Emily, and her hair blowing in the wind on a blue screen, and it was just really fun because she's an incredible actor. So we have a variety of performance, and we can kind of weave in, her different intentions in all different ways.
Yeah, it's a really successful season finale, and I can't wait for the next season either. But I want to direct a question to all of you. Does going on set and watching the filmmaking help with how you edit scenes?
I think not necessarily. I think that I try to view the footage unbiased and on the television screen. I like to be involved on set when it comes to calibrating performance or stunts or, the obvious things of continuity. But in terms of editing my scene, I don't even really like to look at storyboards if I don't have to, because I want to kind of have the most unbiased first cut as possible and view it as the first audience member on a screen like this. And so, I'm going through the emotions. And actually, when I am on set, sometimes for an entire scene, I have my assistant editor usually do the first assembly of it, because I'm like, I know too much and I need somebody unbiased to have a filter on what they think is good. Because in my opinion, when I know too much, I don't do as good of a job with my first assembly.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it helps. It's fascinating for sure. I did one show with Scott a few years ago where I was actually on set for a week because somebody was gone. He wanted some other eyes on the monitor. And it was just great. But, I'm so glad I'm in post for sure. And also, I ate the props because I thought all the French toast was catering. I'm like, I got yelled at. And I was
Todd.
never invited back either.
I was wondering as well, because Anna, you mentioned with the long edit, the first cut of the episode, that you had to kill your darlings in the edit and leave something on the cutting room floor. And for all of you, were you also, what was left on the cutting room floor from your submitted episode? And was it for the greater good of the story as well?
Honestly, I can't think of an example of what we lost from the finale. And I think the finale holds up so well. And we found a through line, an emotional through line through the story, that what was lost was worth it in the long run.
Yeah. I think that it shined through on what was necessary to keep as we kind of paired through. But Matthew, go ahead.
That's right. I mean, one of the best stages of this is when you take the full cut and you start to take out the least best stuff. It's not necessarily bad stuff. It's just the least best stuff, and get it as tight as you possibly can. I did have in my episode a gag that they desperately tried to execute where a real life dog on set goes after Steve Martin's crotch. I won't get into why. It didn't quite work. We tried really hard to make it work. It's better without it. And we ended that scene on a more dramatic note because we just found out this important piece of information that the ashes of his friends have two left shoulders, prosthetic shoulders in it. And shortly after that in the script, the dog goes after Steve Martin's crotch, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, speaking of, I was going to say, speaking of crotches, it's very different what was left out from the Dune prophecy finale versus what was left out of Overcompensating. And I feel like, there's it's always jokes in Overcompensating, right? Extra jokes. And like what Matthew said, they're always just like the least good jokes because everything was really funny. And in the montage of Charlie XCX singing Boom Clap cut with Benny and Carmen in the bathroom releasing their demons at the same time, there was also a cut beats of this other character just jerking off in one of the bathroom stalls next to them. And we ended up cutting that one, and it was so funny. And he was watching car accident videos on his phone at the same time. And, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, well, we're trying to tell the story of Carmen and Benny kind of realigning and coming back together. Like, even before they can emotionally, they're spiritually coming together and they're having this experience. And so it's like, all right, well, we got to lose that funny one and, for service for the episode.
Yeah, I would say for the pilot, though, it wasn't even a case of losing the least good jokes. It was like there's some jokes that are gone where I'm like, crushed about. But
I
like the
know.
pilot's it's 36 minutes long, and that's long for comedy. They always want quick, you know what I mean, to get. So that one was just like there's 42-minute versions of the pilot that are hysterical,
I'm
and the
still sad
finale
about
too.
the 9/11 joke.
Oh yeah, well,
I worked
specific.
I worked on Veep for a season, and the whole process of Veep is, it's supposed to be a half-hour show, but they shoot 60 pages. They shoot 60 minutes, and you cut 60 minutes, and I have to tell you, on Veep, it's all funny. Really, really funny. And then they come in and start like taking out amazing stuff so that you have incredible stuff left over. And that's just their process, because the stuff that they threw out that they think is like, that's mid jokes, everybody else would be very happy to have that kind of humor in their show. But and so the process of working on Veep was tricky because they shot 60 minutes, and you're not taking out scenes, you're going out and basically you're finishing the writing process in the edit room. So he'll say, well, the first line of the scene should be the last line of the scene. It's like, but it's a walk and talk. It's so you have to figure out how to move pieces around as they're traveling down a hallway and getting different things in there. But that's like where I really learned how to kill darlings. I was like, I cannot believe we're losing this from the show. But they're like, no, it has. And he was very insistent about it not being over 27 minutes. Although I think we went.
Veep is largely improv too, isn't it? Isn't there a ton?
It's
No.
a lot of set rewriting. The writers are there pitching ideas on set more, and there's, and everybody in that cast is incredible. So they're, even when they're standing in a corner not talking, they're giving you could do the whole
Yeah.
scene on them, just their reactions. So it's a struggle. It's a good struggle.
Good struggle.
How much is the director and the showrunner and all the players involved influential in the editing process? Because is there a way that you take certain takes that then get challenged and the director might want a different take that used? Or do you always know which take the director and producers, I guess, will also want in the show?
I mean, all the time. I feel like I always hope that just my tastes align with them. So whenever I'm doing my first cut, I'm always going based off of my taste, and I find that I do a worse job if I try to imagine what the director or the producer wants. So I'm just going to go off of my taste, and then if that doesn't align, or if maybe we iterate on the scene, and now because of that iteration a different performance is better, that's the constant flow of storytelling and editing. But I think it's important for me to be trust my own instinct and start there.
Yeah. I think with the pilot and Overkill, like since I've worked with Scott so much and we know each other so well, it was like, and we kind of just have the same sense of humor. So I think there was a lot of, I think there's a lot of stuff in the end that was in the editor's cut, just because we just kind of have a second nature. It's not like that with every showrunner. You're kind of like, and a lot of times you're like, why the hell are you picking this? And you're really depressed about it. And then at the end, you're like, it really worked. Like, that's what they were doing. And it really, like, I've had that before where something was on air. It's like, I didn't realize it until it was actually streaming, you know what I mean, of why they did what they did.
Yeah, I think Amelia and I had a similar experience with Alison Shapker, we had worked with before on Westworld, and she brought us along to Dune Prophecy, I think because our tastes aligned with hers. And so we kind of had this confidence going in that we knew what Allison was going to like.
I was going to say, there's nothing a showrunner wants more than for an editor to deliver them a cut that they're like, great. I have less work to do because I have to be on set and in the writer's room and all sorts of stuff. So, if you're doing well on the show, and hopefully they don't have a lot of notes, it's sort of like, yeah, no, you get it. That's the taste. And they go in and they play with some things. And occasionally you'll have an episode that's, got an issue, and the issue started in the writing phase or some other place where they just didn't solve a problem. And so you're solving that problem at the end of the editing process. But yeah, in terms of their input, you get to, I'm always, as soon as I get one note, if someone could watch one of my cuts and say like, it's great, but there's, one take I want to change. I'm like, that's my favorite part. Don't touch it. I'm always sensitive to it. And then I back off and go like, let's see what it is. And by the end of the process, as Todd said, it's you usually look at it and go, you think I made all of these changes, but in the end, it's really like 75 or 80% of the cut you handed in the first place.
Yeah, a lot of times it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I agree with you, Matt, that like they showrunners basically what they love about an editor is making their life easy. You know what I mean? Because like they can sit there and pick every take and every frame and like you know what I mean with a bad editor and still make a great show, but it's like a ton of work and it's like if you can do that without them having to tell you every step of the way, then it's just I feel like that's what they like the most.
Yeah, and seeing footage sometimes in a way that they haven't, and seeing
Hmm.
things because they imagine something in a way in their head, and then we get to be the person who reimagines it, and maybe presents it in a way that um, isn't what they expected. And I think that's the beauty of, collaboration.
Mm.
Sometimes you also have to convince them that the idea that they had in their head about what they shot. This is why this goes back to the set thing. If you're on set, the thing about being on set is the producer and anybody who comes into the edit room, they're not seeing what's on screen. As Amelia said, they're seeing the argument they had about something over here and this happening and the in joke that happened between the actors that
Hmm.
seems so funny on set that you have to use that take because everyone was laughing, but they fail to notice that it was the joke after cut that they're laughing at actually. So sometimes they're determined to use a certain thing that they believe works and doesn't always. And sometimes you can convince them if you're lucky, and sometimes they'll hang on to it. But the good ones will see eventually for the better part, for the best version of the show, they'll see what works and what doesn't.
And I wanted to leave you all with one final question. And just looking back at the episode that you submitted, what are you most proud of and what do you hope voters take away from your work?
Well, okay, I'll start. Well, in Dune Prophecy with Anna, I feel like the interweaving of so many characters and the conclusion of so many different storylines, past and present. I think the understanding that the great undertaking it was for us to put it together I'm really proud of, because the finale could have really been edited in so many different ways and so many different orders because we have such an ensemble cast. And the way Anna and I collaborated to figure out and try many different versions, of the way of kind of putting that story together, I think I'm just really proud of it. And before I give that to Anna, I'll say with Overcompensating, I'm really proud of the weaving of the comedic elements, but also keeping a real human feel. I mean, part of that is baked into the script and the directing and the acting, but as an editor, weaving between really funny scenes and then kind of crying and feeling really, really devastated for a character. And like, in the end of episode 4, when Carmen is going to go potentially sleep with Peter and walk off, it's like this heart-wrenching, like you kind of want it and you kind of don't, and you've just come off of this crazy montage and there was spanking and a naked roommate, and it's just, and then you're also feeling all these real emotions, and I think that I'm just really proud of kind of the balancing act that to put that together.
I would say like for me sort of on the micro level, the bro handshake, which I talked about before, I just love how that came out just because it's so strange and surreal and funny. But I think just the fact that, pilots are always super tough because you're introducing all these characters that no one knows and you have to get people interested. Like you have like 5 minutes to get them hooked or they're just going to turn it off. So I guess that would be something to be proud of, because I feel like there's something about this show that really kind of grabs you right away and you realize it's different and yeah, getting people sucked in right away, I think is a great achievement to do.
Yeah, I would say just piggybacking off of what Amelia said is I hope that people will watch the finale and have this kind of seamless cinematic viewing experience, not realizing all the work that went into it and how difficult it was to put all the pieces together and just kind of feel the emotional weight of the story for all of our different characters and how it sets up a new season really well on that cliffhanger. And I'm also really proud of just how collaborative we all were and how we were able to just all come together to tell this great story with all departments, visual effects, sound, editorial, writing. It's just a lot of fun, and I hope it shows on screen.
I'll just copy Anna a little bit and say that I think we all want our shows to, you're not supposed to notice the editing. So on my particular episode, there you know, the style of it is supposed to feel raw and unmanipulated as much as possible, and yet there's so much that went into making it, the pace and all the things work and still feel like maybe it wasn't edited, that it just kind of spilled out off of some tape. So I'm proud of that. I think it plays, and I hope people take away that they had a fun time watching.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you being so open and talking about your shows like this, and for sharing the process and the passion. And yeah, I really appreciate it, and thank you for watching, and best of luck to everyone this Emmy season.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice
Thanks
meeting
so
you guys.
much.
Fun.